It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth, financial literacy educator and speaker, entrepreneur, and chairman of the board of Bank Information. Take charge of your financial future with Your Personal Bank. Now here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. If you listened to the show last week, you know I got pretty fired up about our freedoms, and I felt like a tax on freedoms and quite a few things like that. And I'm feeling... I got to admit it. I'm passionate. I'm equally frustrated on things that are happening going forward. There's some economic news that I really want to talk about here, having to do with both inflation and the Senate, the infrastructure bill. They're kind of tied together in many ways, but let's start off with the inflation numbers first, because we need to really pay attention to this, because what's going on is going to impact our money, the cost of goods and services, everything that we do, our ability to make money, keep it, pass it on to the next generation. Your personal bank, in my opinion, is going to become more and more valuable as time goes forward, because you need a highly sensitive interest. You're going to need an investment that's highly sensitive to interest rates. How's that? In other words, goes up when interest rates go up, because, that's going to be forced upon our government at some point. I talked about it, like I said last week. If you missed it, go to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to any of the previously recorded shows, by the way, anytime you want, and you'll see what I'm talking about in terms of government spending and things like that. You know, it's no secret. I'm a fiscal conservative. I've been one forever. I haven't changed my tune on that, and so I'm right now quite frustrated because of the spending that has happened already and is continuing to happen as we go forward. So let's just touch on this. First of all, the first news that I think is extremely important that needs to be, people need to know. So this past month, the inflation rate for businesses hit 7.8%. Now, folks, the number itself might not mean very much, but the reason that is so important is that it's the highest inflation level for business ever recorded. So this was for July of 2021. Again, we have the highest year-over-year rate, it's 7.8% for business inflation, ever recorded. This is including like times where, 1970s and things like that. In fact, some of the latest Bureau of Labor statistics, the Consumer Price Index, shows that the prices for used vehicles, for example, over the past year have increased over 41%. Gasoline and fuel oil have seen increases also of around 40%. Folks, that's an increase. In other words, if it costs $1 last year, it costs $1.40 today. If a used car costs $10,000, it costs $14,000 today on average. These 40% increases in prices in 1 year is significant. It's historic, actually. And now we have an inflation rate for businesses nearing 8%. What is that going to do to our money? Well, it's going to do a lot of things. But first thing you need to understand is, if a business, their cost of doing business increases by roughly 8%, for example, and that business sells a product or service, what do you think is going to happen to the cost of that product or service to you, the consumer? In other words, do businesses pay taxes? Do businesses pay for inflation? The answer is no, they do not. They pass the cost on to the consumer, or they reduce their expenses, or they reduce the quality of the product, or any various combination of those things. One of the biggest expenses that most businesses have happen to be employees. In fact, many, many businesses, their number one expense is payroll. If their cost of doing business is going up and they are in a position where they don't feel like they can increase the price of their product or service because the consumers won't pay it, for example, so they've decided they need to reduce expenses, and you're the business owner, and your number one expense is payroll, what's probably going to happen? It means there's going to be fewer people employed. or the people that are employed are going to work for less money, or fewer hours, or any number of things. These are the effects of inflation, and particularly insidious effects of business inflation. So the point I'm trying to make is this is serious, folks, and we need to pay attention to this. And as a fiscal conservative, I've paid attention to this for decades, literally. Most people don't. Okay, I get it. It's boring. It's numbers. It's math. It's money. It's whatever. But this makes a massive impact on our our finances, our economics, our personal economics. And what's infuriating, this is the part that just, to me, the light at the end of the tunnel here, the positive coming out of this is, as things continue to get worse and the impacts start, people are noticing gas prices are higher. They're not ignoring that. And if somebody's going to go out and try to buy a used vehicle, they're going to notice the price. I was looking for a Jeep the other day. I was wanting to get a 4-wheel drive Jeep. I was blown away. I was shocked by the prices. I had no idea that used car prices had gone up so much. This article now explains it. But I was shocked by the prices because I was looking for a late model, low mileage Jeep because I wanted a 4-wheel drive vehicle. Well, I've decided to wait on my purchase because, frankly, I had sticker shock to what I was used to. I was unaware that used cars prices had increased so much because I wasn't in the market, I wasn't shopping for that, and I wasn't looking for that. This is the same type of experience that people are going to, as time goes forward, as they go out in the marketplace and decide or start looking to purchase something. You know, things like food and gas and things like that are hard to ignore because those we deal with those expenses on a regular basis. But the other, when we start seeing these other things like these big ticket purchases, like a vehicle, for example, as more and more people run into this, they're going to become aware of this. And that's the silver lining, that hopefully people will wake up, smell the coffee, and realize what's causing this. I'm hopeful that people are smart enough to realize what's causing this. Well, a lot of what's causing this is the Federal Reserve, of course, continuing easy monetary policy. I talked about this in the last show, last week. What's happened, I think I figured out what's happened here, and it's infuriating. Basically, big business and big government have become addicted to low interest rates, much like a drug addict is addicted to drugs. And whether it's good for them or not, they've become addicted to this. The problem is, as we continue down this path and inflation continues to rear its ugly head and continues to get worse and worse, it's going to cause a crisis. The longer we wait, the longer we kick the can down the road, the bigger the crisis. And this is why the bipartisan infrastructure bill is so infuriating. It's not that I'm against infrastructure. I understand that that's something that's rather popular, and that is something that is actually one of the constitutional duties of our federal government, is to maintain infrastructure, interstate commerce, and all that. I understand all that. But the fact that they passed the $1.2 trillion bill, and it's not all paid for, so it increases the debt, which will ultimately either increase inflation or taxes, one or the other, or both. It's that they have to do it now after spending something over $6 trillion on COVID relief and other things. And to make it an extra infuriating on top of that, that there's a second $3.5 trillion package that'll basically pay for family, health, education programs, and other priorities like that, that the Nancy Pelosi at the House said they will not vote on this infrastructure bill unless it's tied together with the other. So they're not happy. They're not happy with spending $1.2 trillion. No, that's not good enough. You've already spent over $6 trillion. No, we got to spend another $3.5 trillion. So they said they're packaging them together, sort of, like twins. You know what I mean? The 1.2 is bad enough. But no, they got to go for 4.7. Again, politicians and big business are addicted to spending like a drug addict is addicted to a drug. The solutions here, I mean, I guess there's the small, what do you and I do, and then there's the bigger picture. I mean, the things that you and I can do is, right now in the short term, not much in terms of stopping all this spending, and that's what's so infuriating, because the damage is going to come down the road. It's not going to happen tomorrow, next month, next year, certainly. We're going to see this. We're going to see this in an additional inflation, as I talked about earlier. The prices of things are going to go up even further because they're just pumping paper into the system, more money into the system, more dollars chasing the goods and services. We, the American people, all of this, irregardless of your political beliefs or leanings or whatever, doesn't matter who you are, we are all going to pay the price for all this. Whether we agree with it or like it or not, we're going to pay the price. And the people that are in favor of this, the frustrating part of that is they just don't seem to, they need to wake up and smell the coffee. They think that, well, it's going to, the rich will pay for it, or somebody else will pay for it, or all the, I'm not sure really what they think. I guess is what it comes down to. I don't fully understand or comprehend their thinking, other than they're not thinking. So this is my frustration. So what the initial thing, what can we do? Like I've stated multiple times, clearly, inflation is rearing its ugly head. We're not going to be seeing inflation. We're seeing it right now as we speak. And by spending more money, that is only going to add fuel to the fire. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. What's going to happen? It's going to burn brighter and hotter. It's going to get worse before it gets better. One of the best ways to help offset inflation, I was saying future inflation, no more. Inflation is have an interest rate sensitive investment. Your personal bank does that. And what I'm going to recommend doing is contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 for more information, or go to yourpersonalbank.com. Get the information. Find out more about this. Determine how you can diversify some of your portfolio, some of your assets, and protect yourself. Give yourself a hedge and something that actually shines when inflation rears its ugly, what is happening. Stay tuned in the next segment. We're going to talk about some of the bigger picture items too, and more about what you and I can do. So don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. Today we're really talking about two articles in particular that came out recently. The first is inflation. Business inflation rates in July hit year over year the highest rate level ever recorded, 7.8%. This is huge, folks. The highest level ever recorded. I can't speak for that enough. Businesses don't pay for inflation. They pass on the cost of those in goods and services, or reduce their expenses or whatever. So this is going to negatively impact consumers in a big way. Secondly, the labor statistics consumer price index showed that over the past year, used vehicles have increased over 40% on average in cost. Gas and fuel, approximately the same, about 40% also. Folks, a 40% increase in costs for fuel and vehicles in just 1 year is historic. And unfortunately, generally speaking, historically bad. Well, let's put it this way. For consumers, historically bad. For businesses and things like that, big business in fact, in many ways, this is why big business and big government are both favorable to this. Like I said, I talked about this a lot in last week's show. Go to yourpersonalbank.com, check it out if you missed it. Yes, their cost of business might go up. Expenses might go up. They might be able to offer. Might have to increase the prices of their goods and services and things like that. Likely will. the bigger businesses can usually weather those storms better than small business can. So in the long run, the big picture, that's what a lot of big businesses are looking at, these global conglomerates, okay? It gives them more market share when their competitors go out of business. And because if they're a multi-global entity, inflation in one country may not impact them negatively in another, particularly if they do more of their business in China, let's say, and China manages to keep their inflation levels lower than the U.S. Well, and they gain market share in the U.S. because inflation is high, well, that's good for business. You see what I'm trying to say? But this is not good for individuals. It's also good for government because the government has historic debt. And they have to pay the interest on the debt, or at least print money to pay the interest on the debt, right? Well, if the interest rates are low, anyone who's ever had a loan understands this of any kind. If you have a lower interest rate on your loan, you pay less interest. The cost of the loan's cheaper, right? So with the federal government having historic levels of debt, a low interest rate environment is paramount. So big business and big government have become addicted, as I've stated, to low interest rates, and that's why we've been stuck with these low interest rates for so long, far longer than what's healthy for an economy or good for individuals or consumers. It's sad. Our representatives are supposed to represent us. Our bureaucrats are supposed to be civil servants, but they seem to have all forgotten that. They're not working for us or representing us. They're doing this for their own benefit. By the way, the other benefits, a bigger picture with big government, is more control also. Because as I've stated before, if a regulator, for example, regulates, I talked about bank regulators. I had a bank regulator say to my face that he would prefer to regulate 5 large banks than 50 small ones. I had a mortgage regulator, federal mortgage regulator, say basically the same thing. Makes their job easier. So it's good for bureaucrats, it's good for the government, big government, but it's not good for the individual or small business, which has traditionally, historically, been the driver of our economy. Now, there's another bigger picture on all this that I think is important to understand, and this was an article I saw. The title of this article really opened my eyes, and it stated, the majority of registered Democrat voters now prefer socialism to capitalism, which happens to be a drastic shift from last year. In fact, the poll stated that nearly 60% of registered Democrats have a positive view of socialism compared to just roughly 50% felt that way about capitalism. So, and the shift was quite a bit, is like over 10% difference from a year ago. Here it was. A year ago, the poll showed something, that 44% had an unfavorable view of capitalism, where it's now 50%. So it's a pretty good shift. The bottom line is about 60% of registered Democrats today have an unfavorable view or favorable view to socialism versus capitalism. Folks, this is the bigger picture of understanding a little bit why our government is doing what it's doing. Its majority of its base, its supporters, support this. And I heard an analogy the other day that I thought was very appropriate here to help understand why so many people favor today socialism over capitalism. And the analogy was, many times the idea is, let's say you have 5 kids in school, and 5 have a cookie. I'm sorry, you have 10 kids in school. 5 have a cookie, 5 do not. And socialism says, well, take half of the cookie from the 5 who have it and give it to the other half. It's redistribution of wealth. So it's fair that all 10 kids have half a cookie. Now, on the surface, that seems nice. It seems fair. It seems appropriate. And that's as far as people go in their thinking. But socialism, that's a terrible way to explain socialism. And the reason is simple. With capitalism, or socialism for that matter, it's assuming the cookie was given to them. Now, here's the facts. The cookie is people's money, right? the vast, vast majority of people who have any kind of money, it was not given to them. They worked for it. They earned it. They risked. The better analogy would be you have 10 kids in school, and over summer break, 5 of the kids played, had fun, goofed around, enjoyed their summer. The other 5 got summertime jobs, threw papers, mowed lawns, whatever, made money. Some made more than others because they worked harder than others. And then they took the money they earned and went and bought ingredients, took those ingredients, went home and baked cookies, and then brought them to school. So now 5 kids have cookies, 5 don't. Some of the kids even have more than one cookie because they worked harder. They made more money. And now socialism says, all right, we're going to break what you have. We're going to break it in half and give it to the other 5. So it's fair. Is it? In other words, 5 worked hard, sacrificed, made good decisions to make money, to purchase the ingredients, and worked hard to bake those cookies, and now half of their cookie just got given away to somebody who did nothing for it. How is that fair? I think if you're talking to somebody, it's important. See, people go on feelings of what feels good and what sounds good oftentimes. But you got to go a little bit deeper and explain it that way and help them understand. Taking the cookie from the kid who worked for it, worked hard for it, and giving it to somebody who didn't and frankly probably doesn't deserve it, how is that fair? See, that changes the whole dynamic, doesn't it? But you have to think an additional step, and that's probably the number one problem we're dealing with right now. And I've come to the conclusion we're not dealing with 2 different groups of people. We're actually dealing with 3 groups of people in the United States. And we're divided up in about roughly a third each right now. Stay tuned in the next segment because I'm going to explain this further, and then you'll understand a little bit more about this socialism versus capitalism.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. We are talking about articles that came out recently, talking about inflation, business rate inflation. If you didn't hear in the previous segments, we just had the highest recording levels ever for business inflation, 7.8% increase, year-over-year increase. That is the highest ever. That includes the 1970s, folks. So we are certainly living in historic times, and we're going to see historic changes to our economy as a result. Secondly, in this article, the Bureau of Labor Statistics just came out and said that the price of used vehicles and gas and fuel have both increased approximately 40% in the last year. That's 40%, 40%. A gallon of gas that used to cost $1 is now $1.40. A car that used to cost $10,000, a used car, now is $14,000 for the same vehicle. Folks, those are huge increases in the costs just in 1 year. This will not go away. It's not transitory. It will not go away immediately because much of what's causing this is the low interest rate environment by the Fed, easy monetary policy, and the historic level of spending our federal government has embarked upon over the last year and a half, and the Senate infrastructure bill, the bipartisan bill, is adding another $1.2 trillion, and the House is threatening not to even vote on it unless they also vote on the $3.5 trillion package that they want in addition to this. Now, we'll see what happens, but I find it ironic, infuriating, in fact, that it's not enough for our federal government already spend over $6 trillion, which is in the past year or so, which is historic, but wants to add another, not $1.2 trillion, but $4.7. Folks, the $1.2 trillion alone, I've heard some folks talk about that adds up to roughly $27,000 for every single American. You know, here's a thought. Instead of spending $1.2 trillion, how about reducing our taxes by that? In other words, not having us have to pay in $27,000 per person. That would be ideal, wouldn't it? What would that do to our economy? it'd be an unprecedented historic boom is what would happen. They won't do it because government is not, if there's anything government is about, federal government is about, more than money, it's about control. Money gives them the control that they so desperately seem to want all the time. The bigger picture is, if this all passes and all goes through, both bills and however it all ends up, we are looking at, we've already blown past all the historic measures, and they're talking about just throwing gas on the fire, and we could see economic numbers, inflation numbers. We're already seeing numbers we've never seen before. We could see numbers that are beyond people's comprehension even, which could have devastating impacts and changes to our economy, to our money, how we grow it, how we invest it, how we pass it on. You need to start looking into options, diversification options with safety, market safety. You need to start looking at things that have tax benefits, reduced income tax liability. You need to look at things that can give you inflation hedge protection. In other words, things that are a higher inflation rate, a higher interest rate environment, succeed in that. Your personal bank does all three of those things. And if you want more information, contact me at 866-268-4422 or at yourpersonalbank.com for more information. But the big picture is, reason why so much of this going on is a new poll shows that approximately 60% of registered Democrats now have a positive view of socialism, where a year ago it was about half. So it's increased by about 10%. The majority of registered Democrats favor socialism over capitalism today. Now, if you believe the previous elections, not just the last presidential one, but you go back several decades, of all the different presidential elections, for example, they've been very close, 51% to 49% type stuff typically, right? For the most part. What the deal is if you look at 60%, so if roughly half of the people voted Democrat in the country, roughly 60% of them favor socialism today. That means about 30% or about a third of the country favors socialism. Many studies show that about similar percentage are conservative and favor capitalism, which means there's a third in the middle. Those are the independents, or those include the independents, the moderate Republicans, and moderate Democrats. And here's where this Senate bipartisan plan was so infuriating, because it passed. A number of the more moderate Republicans joined, and I believe it passed like on a 70-30, 69-31 roughly. So about 70% of the Senate voted for this, which is pretty close to what I was explaining earlier, that about a third favor socialism, big government, higher taxes, take the cookie, split the cookie for those who have a cookie and give it to those who don't, income redistribution, and then about a third of the people out there that are in the middle. Stay tuned in the next segment, because what I'm going to talk about further is what we need to do to change this and make a difference. So don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. Sorry about that end of the last segment. I got usually pretty good at keeping track of this. Got hit on a hard break and kind of got cut off on a thought I had. Really what I'm talking about here is the inflation that we're dealing with, historic levels of inflation. If you missed it, go back to yourpersonalbank.com, check out the show. You can listen to any of the previous recorded shows. But we're dealing now, we're not talking about future inflation anymore, folks. We're now seeing 40% increases on used vehicles and gas. We're seeing almost 8% increase over the year for business inflation, in the highest levels ever recorded in history, including the 1970s. Folks, we are now in historic inflation times. Secondly, it's only going to get worse because part of the cause, one, is the low interest rate environment, easy monetary policy with the Federal Reserve. Two, historic levels of spending by a federal government. We have never spent more money, and they're proposing to spend much, much more, which will only make this more difficult, more or worse. You need to look at alternatives to hedge for inflation, and you need to look. One of the best ways to do that is have a highly interest rate sensitive asset like your personal bank, who historically follows interest rates. We will see higher interest rates in the future because the Fed will be forced to do it eventually because of this inflation numbers. This is a way you can protect yourself. The bigger picture that I was starting to get into, though, and kind of got cut off, I want to finish this thought. So this poll is eye-opening. 60% roughly of registered Democrats now favor socialism over capitalism, okay? Roughly over the last several presidential elections, over the last several decades, they've all been very close. I mean, they've been 51-49% affairs, okay? So roughly half the country has voted Republican, roughly half Democrat. Obviously, if you take 60% of registered Democrats favor socialism, there are folks that are going to favor this big government, income redistribution, higher taxes, all these things, all these changes that our current government is trying to put into effect and is doing. So that's about a third of the country, by the way. About 60% of the Democrats, that's about half, so it's about 30%. So roughly a third are in favor of this kind of stuff. Study after study shows that roughly a third of Americans are conservative. And certainly fiscal conservatives, at the very least. It might be even, closer to 40%, but roughly a third. There's roughly a third in the middle. There's a 20 to 30% or so in the middle, and this is where the change needs to happen. In fact, this Senate bipartisan plan was voted, and I believe it was 69 to 31, which is roughly two-thirds. In other words, of course, the liberals, the ones in favor of socialism, voted for it, Democrats, and more the moderate Republicans, for the most part, which are the folks in the middle. The change needs to happen in the folks in the middle. And the middle folks are the independents, the moderate Republicans, and the moderate Democrats. If they continue to allow these kinds of spending to occur, and these changes to our economy and to our country and to our freedoms and all these things we talk about, we will fundamentally have a different country. We will fundamentally have a different economy if this stuff is allowed to continue for any extended period of time. The fact that 60% of registered Democrats favor socialism, for some people, that means a death knell for our country. It's the end of the world. I don't believe that yet. Here's why. Again, that's about a third of the country. The conservative third, roughly, the fiscal conservative portion of the country, obviously is not in favor of this stuff. It's roughly the 20 to 30% or so, the third in the middle. That's the key. And we don't have to convince or shift thinking on all of those folks. I mean, if we did, it'd be a massive swing. Remember, these presidential elections, these senatorial elections, all these things, many times come down to 51-49%ers, right? Oftentimes, particularly in swing states, as people always talk about. In other words, a 1 or 2% swing, one way or the other, can have dramatic changes in terms of what happens in the future. The independents, the moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans, need to see the wisdom, some of them need to start recognizing the wisdom of fiscal responsibility, of being fiscally conservative with your money, with our money. Remember, it's not the government's money, it's ours. They have none. All they can do is tax us or print more, right, which are doing both. They need to start becoming more fiscally conservative with our money. Now, the silver lining, this is why I don't think it's over yet. The silver lining is, as more and more of these things occur, as more and more of these historic milestones are broken, highest inflation rate for business ever, 40% increases in gas, 40% increases in a year for used vehicles, I stated in the first segment, I didn't even realize that used vehicles had increased so much until a week or so ago when I was looking for a Jeep. I wanted a late model, low mileage used four-wheel drive Jeep, and I was sticker shock. Now I understand why. Decided to wait. I'm not going to buy one. As more and more people run into this, and again, those folks in the middle, the moderates, the independents, they're going to vote their pocketbook, folks. And that's where the change needs to occur. That's where the change. See, you're not going to convince the third that are in favor of socialism. They're committed pretty much. It's unlikely, a handful maybe, but they're committed to where they're at. I could say the same thing about me. I've been a fiscal conservative for decades, my entire adult life. There is nothing you can say or do that's going to change my view about being a fiscal conservative, about my views in terms of whether the government should spend more or less money. There's nothing you can do to change my mind on that. Okay? I believe the same for the folks who favor socialism. Not much you can do or say to change their minds. But that's okay. We don't need to. It's the folks in the middle. And overall, we just need a 1 or 2% difference. I believe the increased costs of gas, the increased costs of goods and services, the disruptions that are occurring will be enough to just move things, swing 1 or 2%. But not only have they done that, a radical agenda has been by our federal government in terms of increasing the size and scope and control of federal government, the attacks on our personal freedoms, what they're teaching in the schools today. There's an uprising among parents across the country. When you add all of those things up, I believe it's going to make a much bigger difference to that middle third, the moderates and independents, than just 1 or 2% overall total. I think it'll be significantly higher than that. I envision, and I anticipate, and I hope, that there's a repudiation, a slap down, hard smackdown, so to speak, in the midterm elections that will finally get some of these politicians to wake up and smell the coffee. Because the biggest problem we have, is that those moderates and independents who are completely and totally out of touch of reality of what our financial situation is and what the financial future holds for our country by continuing this historic and unprecedented spending spree and this historic and unprecedented low interest rate environment, easy monetary policy. The one thing I believe in and trust in with politicians is their desire to get elected and their desire to be reelected. If you want to get a politician's attention, threaten their reelection. I think it was Bill Clinton that said, "It's the economy, stupid." And overall, for the most part, most elections have come down to that. Based on the things that have been done so far already, if our federal government doesn't spend another dollar, and that is my hope, fervent wish, that is what happens, I believe enough damage has already been done that we're going to see significant changes to our economy a year from now, which will be reflected in the polls in a dramatic fashion. Unfortunately, I believe these socialists and folks that are in charge right now, and that's what they are, they're Marxist socialists, can't help themselves. They have found themselves in a position of control and power. And I think they're not acting like winners, like they won permanently. They're acting like, oh my God, we got here. We need to do all we can before we get kicked out. Some damage is going to be done. I firmly believe that. It's going to impact our economy. It's going to impact inflation. It's going to impact the cost of goods and services. It's going to impact investment portfolios, values of assets. And some of this likely will be impacted in a significant manner. We just have to weather the storm and get through the next year or so, just over a year now. and do all we can to block, reduce, or reduce the additional damage that can be done potentially to our economy and to our taxes and to our country in general. I've even heard calls for it's time for civil disobedience. I'm not calling for those kinds of things yet, but I am calling for a call to action in terms of, we need to step up and wake up and smell the coffee and realize that increasing the costs of cars and gas in 40% a year is just not acceptable. By spending so much money and printing so much money, and to allow almost an 8% increase of business inflation in a year, and then not do anything about it. The Federal Reserve not doing anything, not changing anything, continuing to add gas to the fire is not acceptable. Being fiscally responsible, that's a better word. Fiscal responsibility needs to become the order of the day. We need to demand it. We need to contact our representatives. We need to demand fiscal responsibility. Stop spending money like a drunken sailor, or I will vote for a person who will not do that. I will vote against you and rally everyone I know to do the same. Threaten their ability to be reelected. That's the only thing politicians really listen to. And that's where our power still lies. If we don't rise up and make that and again, it's only 1 or 2%, so we don't need everybody. We don't even need a majority of people to change their mind. We just need a few. If what's happened and what's happening, we can't get the word out, we can't educate, we can't get the message, we can't get a few people to rise up, a small percentage, to make a difference, then we have serious long-term ramifications ahead. Our country will be a different country. We will not recognize the society and the country that we have today in the future. And that's the one area that saddens me, because I recognize, again, being first generation, my dad escaping from communism, serving in the military partly to protect the freedoms that we do have that are unprecedented in human history. That's a fact. That's a documented, certifiable fact. To lose those things and to give them up for what is perceived as security. I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said those that pursue security don't deserve freedom. He's right. Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson made similar statements. Ronald Reagan himself, I think, said something, I'm paraphrasing, but freedom is something that needs to be fought for each generation. Thomas Jefferson said something similar to that. We need to listen to these words of wisdom, and we need to protect and stand up for our freedoms in any possible way we can, and that includes becoming more active, reaching out. Hey, if you reach out to your representative, you realize you're probably 1 in 1,000, if not 1 in 10,000. In other words, your voice, your message, will carry the weight of 1,000 voices or 10,000 voices. You can make a difference. Don't let this stuff discourage you too much. As always, stay tuned to the Your Personal Bank show. And for more information, contact me at toll-free 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guest on this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Products and riders may have limitations and may not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Compare when considering a replacement. Dividend rates and baseline of credit rates may change. Contact yourpersonalbank.com for current rates.